It's said to be a really scary movie, and one of the worst American horror movies I've ever seen. Her favorite thriller, Japanese-style gore, is the high-octane version of Painted Skin, and she rushes over to Athene's compound to meet some of her friends and watch the story. The girl looks forward in horror and realizes that her mother is ripping and biting into something, and then, upon closer inspection, it's her sister, and before she can get over the shock of the situation, the mother turns her head, revealing her horrible face, and she's taken by a terrified woman, who's been killed by her mother. Before the girl could recover from the shock, her mother turned her head and showed her a horrible face. She was so frightened that she ran out of the house, but then the door was brutally sealed by her father. Then, in the cellar, the screams of the girl's heart and lungs were heard, and a strange pattern appeared on the door. They were scattered all over the place. The stench from her nose was as if she'd been dead for months, and Mari was overwhelmed by it. She quickly put Kumaro in the car and left. Later that night, something strange occurred. A ghostly hand emerged from Kumara's belly, and something crawled out. Meanwhile, Ben, asleep, heard footsteps on the roof and shone a flashlight up there but saw nothing. As he turned, he noticed a large hole under Mary's neighbor's house, seemingly made by a strange object. Just as he was about to investigate, a peculiar cry sounded behind him. Little Ben turned to look, but then the neighbor's house lights turned on. The hole was now visible, and Mary thought nothing of it, but the little baby in her arms cried out, and seemed to be afraid of the place, so Mary had no alternative but to hurry back to the house with the child, and at night the family was in the midst of a gentle sleep, when the baby was awakened from the monitor, and a terrifying monster appeared beside him, and immediately afterward the monster extended its claws like a baby, and Mary heard the noise, and hurried to the house. On hearing the noise, Mary hastened to get up and look, and found that the child appeared to be wrapped up under the bedclothes, but when she lifted them up, there was a heap of branches, and no sooner had Mary recovered from her terror than a pair of ghostly hands drew her into the top of the bed, and thus the strange creature clutched at Mary's body and took possession of it, and then, taking up the infant, walked silently away into the woods, from which time the little baby was not to be seen, and from which Mary was no longer a woman, and was not to be a woman, but a man. Ben sensed that in a typical person, her body would frequently move in an eerie, ghostly manner, often accompanied by a highly offensive odor of decay, and this smell seemed to linger indefinitely. It was on this dreadful day that Mary's peculiar behavior was finally uncovered by her eldest son, Dee. Overcome with fear, Dee no longer dared to remain at home, choosing instead to hide himself in the house of his neighbor, Ben. He trembled as he vowed never to reveal to his mother what he had been up to. Although Ben was healthy and suspicious, he chose to go along with the concealment. Despite his strength and doubts, Ben decided to maintain the secrecy. However, when Mary heard about this, she did not bother to enter the room or take the child away. Just at that pivotal moment, Dee's father arrived. At the sound of his father's voice, Dee dashed into his father's arms, clinging to him as if he had grasped a lifeline. When they returned home, Dee wished to confide in his father about his mother, but he found himself unable to do so. His mother stood there, staring at him so intently and so well, that he was rendered speechless, unable to utter a single word. The next morning, Ben realized that Dee hadn't come to class, so she went to Dee's house to ask about the situation, and Dee's father opened the door, but he seemed to be a different person. "Dee Elin, my son, I don't have a son." "Dee Elin, you little child, are you still messing with me?" "I don't have a child. I still have some time to think," and that was all the time it took to make Ben realize why he refused to admit that he had 2 children. The board with the sword was also engraved with that strange inverted triangular pattern, and Ben thought, "What's the matter?" It was an unusual image, so when we got home, we checked the internet for information, and to our surprise, the image referred to half-human, half-demon ghosts who lived in the woods all year round, only waiting for beautiful women to pass by, then following them around, looking for a chance to take their skins and feed exclusively on their children, and finally, the cunning creatures also seduced their husbands, so that they couldn't detect any irregularities, which, in light of Mary's recent strange behavior, made Ben think twice. Considering Mary's recent strange behavior, Ben instantly realized that she, too, must have been possessed by the monster, which made sense of Mary's husband's actions, except that the 2 children could never have dreamed of being eaten by their own mother, and to prevent further tragedy, Ben began to watch Mary's house all day long. She noticed that Mary was always going in and out of the cellar, and each time she brought out a bag in order to find out what was in the bag. What was in the bag? Ben took advantage of the night to go to the garbage can and rummage through it, only to find that it contained all the children's belongings. Mary's frequent visits to the cellar finally aroused her husband's interest, but just as she was about to pry open the floorboards and look around, Mary came over and whispered something in her ear. The next moment her husband's whole body became stupefied, and his eardrums cracked open, bleeding out, and he was now in control of his soul. Mary left without a trace, but when she went to her room to take a bath, she found that her skin was peeling off and her teeth were falling out at the slightest touch, so it seemed that Mary's skin was not going to last much longer, and she had to find a new body as soon as possible, and Ben was alerted to this opportunity, so he took advantage of Mary's absence to sneak into the cellar, and straight away, there was a horrible horned goat's horn, and underneath it, there were numerous branches of trees. As the police car moved further and further away, Ben was just about to call the police, but then he noticed his girlfriend's family portrait. Her and her mother's faces were cut up, except for her sister, who remained unharmed. Ben realized that the monster intended to kill his girlfriend's sister. So, he hurried to the beach, where he observed that the creature had already taken its prey into the forest. Upon reaching a hole in the tree, he attempted to pull the girl out, but the monster's immense strength was so terrifying that he hit his head on a rock and fainted. When he regained consciousness, the hole had vanished. He returned home in frustration, only to find the police waiting for him. He had been reported for breaking and entering and was taken to the police station, where he was held for an entire day. Odd, but the police didn't believe him, and even his own father thought he was brain dead. Seeing that no one believed him, Ben focused on the young altar mother. Who would have guessed that the flowers beside her would quickly wither? The monster had already discarded Mary's body and returned to life on top of the altar mother. Without a word, Ben grabbed what he had in his hand and threw it. His father, hearing the noise, rushed over, but his stepmother was in shock. Then, the stepmother came back to life, crying on the ground, still looking like an aggrieved victim. Father was furious and told the police to take his son away. But as soon as Ben got into the police car, he noticed his stepmother saying something to the police. Seeing this, he called out to his father, urging him to go to Mary's house no matter what. At that moment, his father couldn't hear him and dismissed it as the child's gibberish. The car drove further and further away. To Ben's horror, he found that this was not the way to the police station, but a stationary drive to the sea, and then he was held down in the water as if he were a chicken, and he was about to be drowned alive, when the policeman suddenly had a flash of consciousness, and in order to prevent the death of an innocent man, the policeman fired a shot at himself, and at the same time his father, who was filled with wonder at Ben's words, went into the cellar of Mary's house, only to be met with a most horrible sight, a horrible sight. Instead, he entered the cellar of Mary's house to see what he saw, a horrific scene in which Mary and her wife had both been killed, the woman gutted to death on the floor, and the man hanged from the beam of the house. He was about to go forward to take a closer look, but in the next moment, his old father fell to the ground with a serious wound, having knocked over the lamp, and as the fire spread rapidly, the man did not have time to hesitate, and hurried to escape from the pain, before being struck by the monster, who had been in the cellar of Mary's house. The possessed wife pursued him, and despite being hit with a metal rod, she was unharmed. The monster was nearly free when Ben arrived unexpectedly. Without a word, Ben fired twice, and the monster dropped. Ben quickly urged his father to leave, but then something terrible happened. Silence and Solitude's body began to turn, and soon half of the monster emerged. Seeing the worsening situation, father and son retreated to the hills. As the fire consumed the braised chicken pond, Ben realized his brother was in grave danger. He rushed back home, only to find his brother missing. Ignoring his own safety, he grabbed gasoline and rope, and silently ran into the forest. After a thorough search, he found the monster's dark cave and muttered, "I'm not sure I'm going to make a mistake," but he knew he had to return to the forest. Even though Ben's heart was already overwhelmed with intense fear, for the sake of his younger brother, he found himself compelled to enter the cave. As Ben was on the verge of taking his brother away, a disturbing gnawing sound echoed from the cave's depths. Upon closer examination, it turned out to be a horrifying monster devouring the children. But in the blink of an eye, the creature vanished, dragging the food with it. When Ben regained consciousness, he handed his brother over to his girlfriend waiting outside, while he ventured back into the cave to search for his sister, who had mysteriously vanished a few days earlier. Just as he was about to save her and make their escape, the menacing food-guarding monster launched a sudden attack, scraping its vicious claws across Ben's face, leaving him with no alternative but to fight back and kill it. At this crucial moment, Ben swiftly grabbed a branch and thrust it into the monster's neck. Then, he and his girlfriend hurriedly escaped to the cave. However, as Ben was about to climb out, the monster seized him by the feet. His girlfriend, behind him, was trying her hardest to pull him out, but he couldn't withstand the monster's strength. Ben was on the verge of being dragged back into the cave when, at that critical moment, his father arrived in his car. The bright light of the headlights caused the monster to pause in thought. Ultimately, the three of them left the scene, believing this to be the end of the ordeal. Yet, the next day, his girlfriend magically presented Ben with a flower. Back in the car, he smelled it carefully, only to discover it was a fake flower with already withered petals. Unsurprisingly, recalling the monster's power to make flowers wither, he immediately felt concerned. Meanwhile, my girlfriend took the kids to the sea, but she had a strange smile. Clearly, the monsters weren't gone, and a new crisis loomed. That's all for today. I'm Arafat. See you next time.